Hi and welcome to IEPs for ADHD. I know there was a few of you who were not able to access the live webinars, so I wanted to come on here and re-record the whole thing so that you guys don't miss out. My name is Nicole Schlechter and I'm an IEP mom. I'm also an advocate, but my most important job is a mom, and I happen to sit at the same IEP meetings that you are for my own son. I have 4 kids, ages 3, 5, 7, and 11. And my oldest son is autistic with ADHD and anxiety. I'm a former educator, and so when we experienced a tough situation at school a few years back, and I felt overwhelmed and lost and bullied by the people that were supposed to support me, I knew that I wanted to fine-tune my knowledge and set out here to help families that are just like mine. My son was diagnosed with ADHD at age 9, but he's had an IEP since he was 3 years old. He's always been a really smart kid. So for him, the IEP was more social, emotional, or behavioral deficits. I remember being really afraid of getting that ADHD diagnosis because I didn't want a label just to label him. But his behavior was rigid. It was inflexible. He was so hyperactive. He was impulsively running across parking lots. He did that one time at school drop-off, and it was very scary. And sometimes his behavior was really explosive. We were unable to do a lot of typical family things like visit Santa or go to the pumpkin farm. We had a huge meltdown at the pumpkin farm one time. I was there with a friend and I was embarrassed, and it was hard to manage that behavior in public. We stayed home most of the time because leaving the house was just too hard. It was too much unknown, and I never knew when the next explosion would happen or how I could keep him safe if he wasn't regulated, how I could get him regulated again. And at the same time, I had 3 other kids that needed me to keep them safe. And so we just stayed home. It was just too hard to leave the control that I had in our little bubble at home. We did outside therapy for years. We're still doing outside therapy. We tried medication, and we've leaned heavily on our school team for support so that hopefully down the road he would become a functioning adult. As an advocate, I'd say about 80% of my clients have ADHD. I work with over 100 families a year, and the majority of them are struggling with focus, executive function, impulsivity, explosive behavior. And today we're going to talk about the areas that I see parents and schools struggling to address with ADHD kids and how we can support them in an IEP. Every single week, I talk to a family who has a new ADHD diagnosis, and they get their neuropsychology report and they go to the school and they take it to the school, and it says, the doctor says that my child needs help in these XYZ areas. And then the school says, oh, ADHD, he's not going to qualify for an IEP, so here's a 504 plan. Let's just see how it goes. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Here's the thing. He won't qualify for an IEP isn't always accurate, and it doesn't follow the procedure for determining eligibility under IDEA law, which is the federal law that governs special education. But is a 504 plan appropriate? It might be. Is an IEP better? Maybe for your child, but the truth is that until we follow the procedures and we gather more information about how the diagnosis affects them at school, it is impossible for us to determine that he's not eligible based on grades and diagnosis alone. Instead, we should be asking the school to complete a full comprehensive evaluation and determine eligibility only after we've completed that whole process. Oftentimes when it comes to things like focus or organization, the school is able to offer a few accommodations right away because those are the tools that they always offer for kids who are struggling with focus. But your child is still confused about instructions. He's losing homework. Maybe he's not turning in assignments. Or your child is shouting out in class and getting into trouble and jumping out of his seat so that the school uses the classroom reward system, like a color chart, for example, and your child ends up on red every single day. The problem here is that your child isn't choosing those behaviors. Your child has ADHD. So if he could choose to listen to directions and write things down at the same time, he would do that. And if he could choose to remember to follow the classroom expectations and not shout out in class every day so that he could be on green like everybody else, he would do that. Kids do well when they can. And these interventions that the school is using are really focused on what the behavior is. And for many of our kids, those interventions are useless because they don't have the skill to utilize those accommodations or those interventions effectively, or they don't have the skill to behave in a different way. And that is where your IEP comes in. The IEP is going to give you direct instruction to students who lack the skills to utilize those accommodations that they need, or they lack the skill to behave in a more school appropriate way. Through related services and annual goals, the school is going to teach your student the skills they need to be a more successful student and long-term, a more successful adult. Ideal law says that we should be preparing our children for independent living, employment, and further education. And that means that students who struggle with functional skills like organization or impulse control or problem-solving peer relationships, they can still get good grades and qualify for an IEP. You don't have to be failing to need extra support at school. We just have to show the data in the right way to support the need for the direct instruction that comes in an IEP. So typically, kids who have ADHD might qualify under the eligibility category of OHI, or other health impairment. This eligibility category indicates that the student has a medical condition, in this case it's ADHD, that adversely impacts their daily life. However, when we look at eligibility, we want to consider the options that make the most sense. There's a lot of different eligibility categories, and so it is important for you to ask the questions about why we're choosing this eligibility category. What are the other eligibility categories? We want to make sure we're drawing an accurate picture of what our student is struggling with at school. We're choosing the eligibility category based on what encompasses the most of their struggle. For example, if your child is more academically delayed and maybe struggling like 2 or more grades below their peers, maybe the eligibility category of specific learning disability is more appropriate. Even if they don't have a diagnosis for a specific learning disability, if they're academically struggling, they might qualify under that category, and maybe that learning disability is impacting them more severely at school than the ADHD is. The eligibility category is important, again, so that we can draw a good picture of who your child is at school, but this isn't typically an area that we want to get hung up on. There are some cases that we really want to push for a different eligibility category than the school is offering, but for the most part, choosing just any eligibility category that fits your child the best is great because it qualifies for them for an IEP, and that is the goal, to find them eligible for an IEP if that's what's most appropriate for them. I want to dive a little bit deeper into strategies and annual goals that I've seen successful for students with ADHD. But I also want to note that I'm skipping through some really important IEP stuff that you need to know. And as much as I'd like to give you all of the tools right now, there's only so much time in this workshop. So instead, I added more detail and more specifics and more IEP strategies and parent rights into the IEP Parent Academy course that opens up tomorrow morning. This is a 4-week kind of go at your own pace course for parents who are done feeling lost and overwhelmed in an IEP meeting, and they're ready to ask for what their child needs and get it without a fight. And I'm going to give you all of the details about IEP Parent Academy a little bit later, but right now I want to skip to annual goals and talk a little bit about that. We talk specifics about how to write a goal and how to know it's a good goal over in IEP Parent Academy, but I want to give you some ideas on areas that IEP goals or accommodations that are helpful for students who have ADHD. For example, if your student is struggling with forgetting to turn in assignments, they might benefit from something like a check-in, check-out to go over assignments. They may need a visual checklist for instructions on how to turn in that assignment. But what if it's more than just forgetting to turn in the assignment? And this is where we focus again on that function of behavior and not the behavior itself. What happens before the behavior that is causing that behavior? Why are they forgetting their assignments? Are they completing them and not turning them in? Are they losing paperwork, or are they overwhelmed with the amount of buttons that they have to click on to get the assignment in place? How do we teach them the skill that they need in order to change that behavior? Recently, with so many schools utilizing remote learning, I've heard from a lot of students who are really distracted by the number of tabs and links that they have to touch in order to turn in one assignment. And so these students have benefited from a Google Doc or Google Sheets that includes an assignment link for each class. So it's just kind of like one central place that they go and click on one link for homework assignments. So it would look like ELA and a link to that homework assignment, and math and a link to that homework assignment. Rather than going back to the ELA page or the math page and reading the instructions and going through it again and clicking 5 different tabs sometimes in order to get to the place that they turn things in, we just have a link that links directly to that homework turn in. Now, if we create this tool, we have to determine if the student knows how to access it and they can utilize it effectively. If yes, then it becomes an accommodation. If no, then we write an annual goal to teach them the skill to utilize that accommodation. If your student is struggling with leaving their seat or shouting out in class, most likely the teacher has already offered things like flexible seating or reminders, kind reminders to raise their hand, right? Those are typical things that are offered in a classroom. So if typical reminders are not effective, we might need an annual goal to address that skill deficit. For example, a student who leaves their seat might have an annual goal that says something like, A will utilize his movement break cards as needed within the classroom in 3 out of 4 observed trials over a 3-week period. With this goal, we address teaching A the skill to utilize the break cards. And the way that we address that comes in direct related service minutes. In this case, it's most likely a social worker that might help them learn that skill with those direct minutes. And that person is also going to be in charge of collecting the data on that success of the goal. Sometimes with those goals, you'll see 2 people that are in charge of collecting the data, and that's really great because then we're getting unbiased information and more accurate data. For shouting out in class, we could write a goal like, A will demonstrate raising her hand to participate in whole class instruction or small group instruction 80% of the time in 4 out of 5 occasions as measured by teacher observations. In this case, utilizing a reward for expected behavior can sometimes be effective, and you can do this through a behavior intervention plan or with an informal reward system. But what we want to do is, instead of focusing on the behavior and there being a consequence of that behavior, we want to focus on the expected behavior, praising the student for raising their hand as appropriate instead of providing a consequence for the unexpected behavior like shouting out. Because if we're praising that expected behavior instead of focusing on that unexpected behavior like shouting out, it's going to increase the likeliness of more expected behavior like appropriately raising their hand. Many of our kids with ADHD struggle with peer relationships, or they're not perceived well by their peers. They have the desire to be social, and they might even be observed laughing or chatting with peers at lunch. Oftentimes, these students are not provided adequate social support because they have the appearance of being social. However, our students might not have meaningful relationships. They may frequently argue with peers in groups or on the playground, and they might have peers that avoid them due to their challenging behavior. So when we approach this topic at school, questions like, My child never seems to talk about specific friends. Who is seeking him out on the playground? Or, my child seems to have disagreements often with a number of students. Do you feel like these are isolated incidents, or is he able to problem solve with peers effectively? Those types of questions can help us dig a little bit deeper because they're specific into determining if the child needs direct instructions to teach social skills or not. If the school can't say, yes, peers frequently seek him out, or yes, he's successful at social problem solving, we probably need an IEP goal to address that. If they say yes to those things and you still have concerns, I want you to state your concern and ask the school to take some data on these situations. Data is the most important thing in special education. So when we're asking for something or something new or a change, we need to have the data to back it up. If you think your child needs an IEP or they need a new service or new support or something changed and the school disagrees with you, here's a few things that you can do. First of all, we want to look for the data. Look back at report cards for teacher comments. Look at daily sheets or emails from the teacher. Find the data to support your request for more support and compile it all together and bring it to the school's attention. And again, we want to be specific about what we're saying to the school. For example, you could say something like, for the last 2 years in report cards, teachers have been concerned about A's ability to interact with her peers. In addition, I've received 4 emails this year in regards to A's lack of organization and shouting out in class. And you can follow that up with, I think that this accommodation might be appropriate. I'd like to call a meeting to discuss what we can do about these areas. I'd like to request a full comprehensive evaluation, whatever is appropriate for you. But you want to compile your own data that the school has provided you with over a period of time and bring it back to the school's attention. And then you want to take your own data too. How long does it take to complete homework? Homework is always a hot topic issue for our kiddos with ADHD. How much support or redirection are you giving them? What is he reporting to you about his struggles at school? If he's easily distracted, how many times do you have to remind him to get back on a task? We want to be specific with dates and times and numbers so that the school has something to go off of. When you state a concern like, oh my God, homework takes forever, it's a disaster, last night's homework took him 2 hours to get done, we can't do this anymore. It isn't very specific, it's very generic, and it's hard for the school to know how to help you with that. Instead, it's a lot more compelling when you say something like, on this date, A needed 6 prompts to stay on task and spent 2 hours on 1 homework assignment. A says that he is confused about the instructions and feels the work is too hard for him. That second statement, instead of, oh my gosh, homework is too hard, when you say 6 prompts, 2 hours on 1 assignment on this date, that gives the school some actionable items to work on. So it's important to give them those specific numbers and dates, that hard data, in order to back up your concern when you're asking for something new. So if you've gathered all that data from the school and your own data, and you see some sort of pattern, compile it all together and communicate it to the school. You might need to ask for a new evaluation. You might need to ask for another meeting to talk about the change in support. But you want to put your concerns in writing so that they become part of your student's legal IEP and student record. If the school says something like ADHD gets a 504 plan, let them know that you're not demanding an IEP, but you need the school to provide the data to determine what amount of support is most appropriate. For some kids, a 504 plan is absolutely appropriate. But when your child has a skill deficit, they might need more direct instruction than the 504 plan can offer them. If your child already has an IEP and you're making a request for something more or something new, you have all your data to support your request and the school still says no, request that denial in writing. This denial is called prior written notice, and it's like a requirement for the school under ideal law. Sometimes you might see it referred to as PWN because special education is all about the acronyms. But when you ask for that prior written notice, ask them to also provide you with the data to support that your child doesn't need what you're asking for. If they don't have the data to say that that your child doesn't need that, and you have the data to show that they do, it's really hard for them to provide you with that prior written notice. And again, that's a legal requirement for the school to provide. Now, I know that there are many of you who have more questions, who have IEPs, but you're not confident that they include everything your child needs to be successful. I know it's overwhelming, and sometimes it can feel like everybody is speaking a foreign language at the IEP table. I talk to you all the time. I see all of you parents trying to tell the team what your child needs, and the school just doesn't seem to see what you see, or they don't know how to help you. So tomorrow the door is open for IEP Parent Academy, and you are invited to join us. Years back when I was blindsided and overwhelmed sitting across the IEP table from people who were supposed to be on my side, I committed myself to making sure that that feeling of overwhelm and being blindsided and feeling bullied, that feeling ends with me. As a former educator, I understood the language. I spoke the language at the table with everybody else. I knew my rights and I knew what to ask for, and I still felt emotional and overwhelmed. I nodded my head and I smiled and I agreed to things that I didn't totally understand because I second-guessed what I thought my child needed. I second-guessed my value at the IEP table. And everybody was nice and friendly for the most part, so I had no reason not to trust them until things changed. And the thing is that it wasn't 100% the school's fault that I felt that way. They were, for the most part, doing a good job and answering my questions and providing my child with support that he needed. But I didn't know what I didn't know. And as a result, my son was traumatized by a situation that probably could have been prevented. You're the only expert on your child at the IEP table, and it is your job to be prepared and feel confident about what you know about your child. And I'm going to teach you how to do that in IEP Parent Academy. Over 4 weeks, we're going to be discussing all of the IEP basics that you need to know. We're going to talk about your parent rights, how to make the most impact as your child's advocate, and I'll be giving you the exact strategies that you need to use when things get tough. Plus, I'm giving you a whole special education dictionary to help you learn the exact terms you need to know, like that PWN we just talked about. I'm giving you the IEP Parent Guide. I'm giving you the questions that you need to ask at an IEP meeting and the questions for your related service team. We're going to be talking about how to write goals, what makes a good goal, and I'm giving you a master list of accommodations that are specifically written for students with ADHD. That master list of accommodations is not just a giant list. It's awesome because it gives you different areas that your child might struggle with and what the coordinating accommodation could be. So that when you go to school and you say, my child is struggling with this, can we try this accommodation? It's easy for you to find and easy for you to access. I jam-packed this course with all of the tips, tools, and strategies that I use every day. And this is a brand spanking new course, so I'm offering it at the founder's tuition of $137. But for the first week, you're invited to join for just $97. Every week, you're going to get an email with the content for the week and then be invited back into our private group to ask me anything that you need to know about your child's IEP. I'm including group coaching into the course because I want you to take that information that you're learning in the course and be able to apply it directly to your child's IEP, because all of that information is useless unless you know what it does in your child's IEP. I absolutely love my job, and so I'm really excited to be able to share this knowledge with you. And so if you're ready to join, go ahead and click reply to this email right now, and I'm going to send you the link so you can go ahead and sign up. Tomorrow I'm opening up the doors for everybody else, and I am only enrolling a limited group since this is the first launch. So you have the chance to join today before everybody else, and I will tell you that there are over 3,000 people on my waiting list already. So this course is gonna fill up quickly, and I really hope that I will see you there. Thank you all for coming, and I'll see you inside IEP Parent Academy. Have a good night.